Welcome to the City Council meeting for Tuesday, May 28th. Dave Snyder is running just a few minutes late. I think there's some people caught on metros given the storm that we had, so he should be on his way just shortly. So why don't we go ahead and get started, if I can have the roll call vote? Yes, thank you, Kathy. If you'd all please rise and pledge allegiance with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kathy, for keeping me somewhat organized tonight.
Do my best.
If I can have the roll call, please.
Ms. Berry. Here. Mr. Duncan.
Here.
Mr. Kalin. Mr. Pepe. Mr. Snyder is absent at the moment. And Mr. Tarter. Mayor Brugge.
Here.
Thank you, council.
Okay, and we're ready to adopt the meeting agenda, and just wanted to, before we do that, have a brief discussion. There's two requests that I believe have been made about amending the agenda. One, Mr. Kalin had requested that an item be added to the closed session dealing with the water sale. Is that correct, Mr. Kalin? Mr. Foster, I believe that we can do that in closed session, the items that the Councilmember Kalin wanted to discuss in closed session.
You can, Mr. Mayor. What you'll need to do is at the time you make the motion to go into closed session, you'll need to say, and in addition, and add the water litigation item.
Okay.
That's, the mayor has it in his folder.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So I propose that we add that to the agenda. The other, which I'll again make a disclosure before we discuss this item, is that I own property at 243 Gundry Drive, and my wife is president of the Homeowners Association for Winter Hill. It's referred to as the Winter Hill Community Association. They've previously commented on it, and I can consider these matters fairly objectively and in the public interest. There was a request, at least that the city manager had, that council take up a motion for the VCs to be altered. I believe the city manager has talked to the applicant of that project, and my understanding is that the applicant's facing some deadlines before June 10th, which we could potentially have a vote and a discussion and allow this to get properly noticed, in my view, at our work session, hold a public hearing and work session next week, which is not typically how we do things, but we could always do that. I don't think there's anything prohibiting a public hearing next week and also a work session. Is that right, Mr. Foster?
The question is there anything that would prohibit a work session next week?
No, we have a work schedule. We have a work session
right?
scheduled next week.
Right.
The notion would be adding to that a public hearing on the VC, which would be a resolution to amend the resolution.
There's no legal prohibition on having a vote at a work session.
So
although it's unusual, but it's not illegal.
So my proposal would be that we publicly notice this, give the opportunity for council members to look at what's being considered rather than having 2 hours notice. And it still, I think, meets the developer's request that this get done before deadlines he's facing, which would be the 10th. So that's what I would propose that we do. That way we keep the public integrity, and we have an opportunity for members to see what's going on, have a chance to look at it, and the public to weigh in. And looking at my calendar, the 10th is the following Monday, which I understand causes potential problems for the developer. So if we could do the unusual move of having a public hearing, that's what I would propose that we do, and not consider this item tonight. Does that seem amenable to council members? Anybody want to take this up tonight?
Did you say the developer is all right with the deadline, the schedule you proposed?
That's my understanding. Is that right, Mr. Shields?
The developer has requested action tonight. I've asked him for deadlines as to what the consequences are if there's not action tonight, and I believe that the first hard deadline that the developer would confront would be on June 10th, and so his preference is for action prior to June 10th. His specific request is for action tonight.
Well, I think we all understand that, but I think we also need to make sure that we have an opportunity to look at this material, not 3 hours or 2 hours before. And some of this is getting table dropped on us now, let alone the public hasn't had a chance to see this at all. Dave, does that address your question? Mr. Kalen?
I would prefer that we review it tonight, vote on it tonight.
Other council members? Ms. Berry?
I understood that the public had been engaged. The neighborhood association had dialogue with the developer. Is this correct? So that we are not acting out of concordance with the neighborhood?
I think I would characterize it as a core group of neighbors who've been actively involved with the city and with the developer on the project are informed. The broader public has not been informed because we haven't had time to get notice out about this change to the VCs. But in terms of the immediate adjacent property owners, I believe that they are all informed.
Other council members? Mr. Pepe?
Silence. I'm still fine going ahead with it tonight, given all the discussions. I mean, this is not something new. This is a culmination of negotiations back and forth, heading down a path with essentially an outcome we were trying to reach. So I just don't see that there's something new. I mean, I think this is one of the issues we have with the reputation in the city about not being so business friendly, because every time one little change is made, there seems to be a tendency to stretch it out, stretch it out, stretch it out. And I'd rather see some finality to get this thing moving before something else unexpected happens again at this point, given that we seem to have everybody in a good place where we've come to some sort of agreement on what can be done.
Other council members? Vice Mayor Snyder?
Thank you. I first want to apologize to everyone. There were half-hour delays on Metro, or I would have been here on time. We can discuss that on a later agenda item. Can I ask the city manager, when did you first learn of this request?
I was aware of the request in terms of the developer's need for a change. I communicated that out to the council at the same time that I learned it, and I believe that was last week.
When did you first learn that the developer was requesting action tonight?
The formal request came in today, so at that point we were aware of the formal request. In terms of the need for this to be considered, there had been discussions with the developer last week about the need for it, and some of the issues also associated with the drive aisle. So those communications were made with the adjacent property owners last week and with the city last week.
Well, let me just make a quick comment. I mean, this puts us in a very difficult position, because I would support the change from basically everything that I know, especially if it's tie-barred to the drive aisle. My understanding is that there are representatives of the community who believe that's an acceptable way to go. So I would like to move on it. On the other hand, I think this sets a terrible precedent. This is a project that's had some controversy with it, and this concerns some of those issues. So I don't think it's a very good precedent. I guess the bottom line, Mr. City Manager, is we really needed to know this earlier. But that aside, the ultimate question for me is if we need to act on this tonight in order to preserve the project, then I will vote to act on it tonight. But if that's not the case, it's hard for those of us who agree with the change to agree to it without some degree of public input, particularly on an issue of this controversy. So I would say, I'll ask you straight out, do we need to act on this tonight, in your opinion?
In my conversations with the developer, I do believe that there is the need to do it. That is the way the developer has conveyed it to me. I'm very sensitive to the process issues that are being spoken to, and so forwarding that request to the council is not made lightly. But the information that I have is that the developer, for reasons that were serious for the developer, has requested council action tonight.
I guess I'm asking you, do we need to act on this tonight?
Well, I do think that one thing for the council to evaluate is the merits of acting tonight at a public meeting or calling for an action at either a special meeting or at work session. Neither are ideal, frankly. And so I do think, however, that given the work that the developer has done to address some of the specific concerns that the neighbors had, and the information that I've been provided from the adjacent neighbors, that this is, you know, the upside of changing the drive aisle has caused them to view that they would not oppose this change to the voluntary concessions.
Do we need to act on this tonight?
My recommendation to the council is to act on it tonight.
Let me follow up on that. I think that's the recommendation, but the question that was posed, I think, is do we need to act on it to preserve the project? Hearing from you earlier, my understanding was that there's deadlines of the 10th.
That is true. Probably the best person to speak to the need or lack of need is the developer.
Perhaps the
himself.
developer wants to comment on it. And again, my frustration is here, this has been lingering, and yet we get the request 2 hours, and I know council members have been frustrated before, certainly I have, with table drops right before a meeting on an important issue. And I think, you know, to be clear, it's not just the adjacent property owners that could be affected by any changes to the VEC, it's the city as a whole. So for me, it's a bigger process issue rather than just the adjacent property owners being happy with what's transpired here. I think we have to look out for the entire interest of the city, not just the directly affected folks. Mr. Kearney? Oh,
This is actually kind of a cleanup issue as far as we're concerned. This was a topic that was raised very late at the last council meeting that we all, looking back on the transcript, said we would come back and address if need be afterwards. So everyone's been aware of this for at least 2 weeks. This didn't pop up on Friday or today. And we have gone back and done a lot of the homework we're supposed to be doing, and we talked to the neighborhood group. So it's kind of a cleanup issue as far as I'm concerned. If we delay it, it causes me problems on a couple of different fronts. It may cost me some dollars on one negotiation, and it slows me down on the site plan. So I don't think it's a major issue that needs to be delayed. And if you don't like the way it's going tonight, then we can vote to delay it because you need better discourse on it. But I don't think you're going to need that if we go through it.
would you be at any loss if this were scheduled for next week?
Next, before the 10th, no, I could get it done before the 10th.
If it was scheduled for
I don't
the
know what we're
3rd,
going to accomplish between now and the 10th or another meeting.
other than allowing the public to know about it?
Well, it's not any, this isn't any different than what my voluntary concessions have been all along. They were changed the very last second 2 weeks ago. We're just going back to kind of what we had submitted with a clarification on a 2-hour window. So I don't really feel like the public didn't know what was going on.
You know, I'll let other council members weigh in. So,
Need to talk about this, or do you?
no, I think if we can get a motion, then we'll go from there.
What's the motion?
It'd be to add this item to the agenda. And it would have to carry by, I believe, 5.
Right, it needs a 2/3 majority to add an item to the agenda for action tonight.
I move we amend the agenda to add this item.
Okay. If I can get a second?
Second.
Ms. Berry on the second. If I can have the roll call, please.
To amend the agenda, Mr. Kalin, Ms. Berry. Ms. Berry?
Yes?
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalin? Mr. Pepe? Mr. Snyder?
No.
Mr. Tarter? Mayor Brugger?
No.
Thank you, council.
Okay. The meeting as amended has been adopted. And we have 2 proclamations. The first one that's going to be presented is by Delegate Jim Scott.
Mayor, it's my honor to welcome Delegate Scott to tonight's meeting, and he will be doing 2 presentations, the first one being for Mr. Edstrait. Delegate?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm here tonight to present to you all unanimous resolutions adopted by the Virginia General Assembly commending Walter Mess and celebrating the life of Ed Strait. I'd like to ask Edna Frady if she would join me here, please. As I said, these resolutions were unanimously adopted by the General Assembly. I think you all have some idea of how frequent it is we do things unanimously. Glad to say that these are among those things. I happen to be one of those people who knew both of these folks for a long while. Bittersweet that I could be here tonight to talk to you a little bit about resolutions after their demise. Ed Strait I knew as a member of the Virginia House, but also as a member of the Board of Supervisors in Fairfax County, where he was also very active as a part of the Community Services Board activities. And I knew Walter because of his legendary work on the trail, we call it, the WNOD trail. Without Walter, what you see today would not exist. It is really a unique park for the whole community of Northern Virginia, and as someone who had a lot of energy devoted to getting that project finished with my friends in Fairfax and those of you all here in the council and elsewhere in Falls Church. But it was really Walter's initiative and his commitment to this project that made it, I think, what an outstanding project it is, and how wonderful it is for the citizens of all Northern Virginia, since it goes all the way from Arlington out Alexandria, out beyond Reston, and without Walter, things would have been quite different. So, House Joint Resolution 639 is the resolution for Ed Strait, and I have copies, have the resolutions themselves here tonight that I'd like to present to Edna for her presentation to the Strait. And also, Edna has agreed to convey the Mess resolution to that family as well. I'm going to help Edna with getting this heavy burden out of the council chambers so that nothing will happen to them. But I want to express to you all how much of a pleasure it has been for me to work with you and the city council and city staff during my term in the General Assembly, which is, I think you all know, will be ending at the end of this year. For me to have a chance to commend these wonderful citizens, these three unique citizens, I'm not now including Jesse Thackeray, who we'll honor a little bit later, is really a pleasure and something that I will cherish for a long, long time. So I'm going to give these two, and I believe you all have copies, or if you don't have copies of the resolution, I will provide it, I believe, to Cindy. She can make copies for everybody to have.
Great.
So here we go, and Edna.
Yeah. Jim and Edna, thank you very much. If you don't mind coming up, and we'll do a quick photo.
Great.
Vice Mayor Snyder wanted to say a few words.
Thank you. Please feel free to find a seat. I don't want to keep you standing here, but I do want to say a couple words about both of you. We'll say some things about the honorees in a minute, but Jim, I want to thank you for your years of public service. and your advocacy on our behalf, and it's much appreciated, and I wish you well in the future. Edna, as well, has put in years of service for the community of Falls Church in so many ways, so that's appreciated, and I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to thank her for her service in many, many ways for the city of Falls Church. Just a quick word about the people for whom these resolutions have been issued. I too have had the privilege and honor and opportunity to have worked with and served in various capacities with both Ed and Walter. With regard to Ed, I had an opportunity, as many of us did in the community, to say a few words over in the community center several months ago. So I'll focus a bit on Walter Mess. I really knew Walter fairly late in his many careers. He was as tough-minded but as fair and civil a person as you could ever meet. He had a clear-eyed sense of vision and the ability to see that vision through to reality. He's well known for his exploits during World War II, having been personally recruited by Wild Bill Donovan for the OSS. He was a lawyer, a financier, and a public servant beyond any words. He would always ask, how are things going in the city of Falls Church? Even though his responsibilities were regional and international, he'd ask how the families were. He would always make a point of attributing success not to himself, but to the staff and to his fellow board members. And Barry Bushell is one of those board members who shared in bringing about the success. It is true that he is more than any single person responsible for the W&OD Trail, and that millions of people, both now and in the future, will be enjoying a legacy that Walter left. You know, if Falls Church were a forest, we've lost two big redwoods here, and we honor them tonight, and I appreciate that we have the opportunity to do that. And finally, of Walter, and Ed too, but especially of Walter, as Edwin Stanton said of Lincoln, now he belongs to the ages.
Vice Mayor Snyder, other council members, Ms. Berry?
I had the honor of meeting Mr. Mess through Roger Naberville, and I just wanted to say that, you know, it was an honor to know him as a trail user, a daily trail user. I am grateful for his foresight and his persistence. It reminds me of, you know, what we're all working for, and that is legacy. And his legacy is vast and important, and I think that is the measure of an honorable life, and Walter Mess certainly lived an honorable life. Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I understand that they are going to be replaced soon.
Yeah.
Yell, Phil, just yell.
Yell that way for me.
Okay.
Oh, gosh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, too, have had a chance to talk about Ed, so I will not do that tonight. But I did want to say that as a member of council, I've had a lot of great experiences, but one of the very best was the 20 minutes or so that I spent about a year ago taking Walter Mess to the Chamber of Commerce dinner with my wife. He needed a ride, and although, of course, I knew Walter, we all did. Didn't know him personally. He knew my mother-in-law better. And the 20 minutes that it took to get from his house to the venue for the dinner were the best 20 minutes. The crash course in Falls Church history, what Ms. Berry said is so true. He told the story about Edna's dad, Don Frady, and Walter, you know, sitting on a fence up at the land that is now the high school in the late 1940s, and just talking about, hey, this would make a great place for a school. We should really get together and buy this land. And I guess the city didn't really have the resources to do it now. They basically put a personal promissory note in to get that deal started. And that kind of vision, that sort of, notion that, we could build a community around the idea of education, build a high school from scratch, is the sort of standard that we strive for here. We don't always make it, but we're very grateful for all the things that both Walter and Ed Straight did for this community, and we thank Edna especially for coming and receiving both of these certificates. Thank you.
Other council members? Thank you very much. Right, we are on to anybody who's here to be sworn in, new boards and commission members. Is there anybody to be sworn in? Okay. We are on to receipt of public comments, and the first public comments that we have are from the Falls Church Voluntary Firefighters and their annual report, and I believe the chief is here with us. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, member of the council. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. We are very proud to present you with our annual report for our 2012 activities. You should have a copy of this report in your package, and feel free to follow along if you care to. Generally, we look forward to making this presentation every year because it's a good news message. It's an opportunity to come before you and talk about all the accomplishments of our department, the improvement in volunteer membership, the increase in our hours, and the broadening of our services. Unfortunately, this year will be a slightly different presentation, but before I discuss some of the challenges we're facing, I would like to take a moment to recognize some of the good things that we were able to accomplish in the year 2012. In case you're not familiar with the arrangement, the Falls Church Volunteer Fire Department works in conjunction with other entities to provide fire and EMS services to the City of Falls Church. That relationship is illustrated on page 3 of the report, and I refer to this as the four-legged stool, if you will. You've got the Falls Church Volunteer Fire Department, the Arlington County Fire Department, the City of Falls Church government, and the Arlington County government. And these all have a complex, intertwined relationship that require each to work together in harmony to provide the high-quality fire and EMS services that our citizens have come to expect. Most people know the Falls Church Volunteer Fire Department from our annual Santamobile drive. Everybody loves to see Santa Claus riding through the streets and look forward to getting a candy cane and a fire prevention flyer. But obviously our organization is dedicated to doing a great deal more than that, and we accomplished a great deal more than that in 2012. Last year, our department contributed over 6,700 hours of emergency services and responded to over 1,900 calls for emergency service. In order to prepare for that service offering, we contributed more than 4,300 hours of training, and I'm very proud to say that our membership is some of the finest trained and highly trained individuals that you will find in any department anywhere. Additionally, and perhaps a little bit less glamorous, our members contributed 3,500 hours of administrative service. And to answer your question, I'm sure you're wondering, what is administrative service if you're in the fire department? It's really operating the business of the fire station. That's everything from changing the light bulbs, to washing the fire trucks, to working with vendors on maintaining facilities and things of that nature. As an organization, our value proposition is quite simple. We are 50 operational volunteers intended to augment a Arlington County career complement of 12 personnel on duty at any given time. Arlington's providing the 24/7, 365 coverage, and it's when there's a surge capability that's needed, that's when the volunteers step in to help out. In 2012, you'll recall, we had both the North American derecho as well as Hurricane Sandy. Those were big events that taxed fire and EMS needs regionally, and that's the opportunity for the volunteers to come in and really help take the load off the system. In addition, we also provide a number of what I would refer to as lower profile activities. These are things such as fire prevention and public education. In 2012, we delivered fire safety education to more than 500 children in more than a dozen events outside of our fire station facility. Additionally, inside the facility, we hosted 76 birthday parties at the fire station, which also gives us a good opportunity to interface with the children. And in that capacity, we interfaced with over 1,200 children in 2012. This year, the volunteers also replaced a 1995 Ford Explorer, which was a vehicle that was originally owned by the city, and they did that at no cost to the city through volunteer donations. Despite the good work that we've done in 2012. We are a little bit shaken in our presentation to you this evening because we do see some storm clouds on the horizon, not just the ones that you saw out this evening, but more figuratively. Recently, we've started to see a pretty disturbing trend in our ranks. Our standby hours, our training hours, and our administrative hours are all collectively down. Our membership numbers are dwindling and are down 13% over the previous year. Overall, the total number of hours of service within our department is down 28%. This is truly a cause for alarm, and it is something that has both myself and my fellow officers very concerned. There are several reasons, and it is a fairly complex set of issues, but I will outline just a few things that I think are pinnacle to the success of our organization that are kind of driving us currently in the wrong direction. Volunteers have hit a glass ceiling. Working with Arlington County's fire department, EMS providers are limited as volunteers to providing services only at the emergency medical technician basic level. That is the lowest level of certification that is afforded in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Many of our members aspire to do more, for instance, to become paramedics, and unfortunately that is not a service that they are afforded to provide in this area. On the fire side, volunteers are often riding in conjunction with career staff from Arlington County, and when doing so, they end up finding themselves relegated to menial tasks. While there's no formal policy in place to do this, many of the career officers from Arlington have stated that they've been instructed to keep volunteers outside during structure fire responses, and this is an arbitrary and unjustified policy. Members who have been trained and have afforded a great deal of time and expense have gone into other local jurisdictions like Fairfax County, Fairfax City, Loudoun County, and Prince William counties, where they have served as minimum staffing, battalion safety officers, battalion chiefs, and incident commanders. That's with the training and the experience that they were afforded in our department. Our volunteers do not receive financial compensation for their services. By definition, we're volunteers, we don't get paid. But where the value proposition comes in for them is in the form of rewarding public service. Having a rewarding public service experience is in and of itself its own compensation. And like any other job, an individual is going to seek more rewarding opportunities, even if that takes them elsewhere. Over the past 2 years, we've also seen the negotiation of the three-party agreement lead to a lot of wild speculation from within the firehouse between the career staff and the volunteer staff. This has had a significant negative impact on our morale, and I think that's also contributing to our downward trend in numbers. The three-party agreement is vital to all three parties to try and delineate whose responsibilities fall where, and it's a difficult and complex issue that I know that you've been well briefed on. Right now, Falls Church is paying for the acquisition of a new ladder truck and an engine in FY 2014. I was the person who shepherded those CIP line items and did some of the background research. It's my understanding that Arlington is now requesting that they handle that acquisition and simply have the city pay for that equipment, and that they are proposing that they buy the same vehicles that Arlington currently specifies. Those vehicles do not equitably accommodate volunteers, and they will result in a significant decline in our membership. It is difficult to field a volunteer fire department that does not permit volunteer firefighters. I cannot stress the importance of this enough. Arlington has requested to take over management of the fire station facility, which is a job that I currently hold. And this is activities related to the maintenance and upkeep of the facility, coordinating repairs, processing vendor invoices. These are all activities that I perform today at no cost. Arlington's been unable to substantiate the potential costs involved, but they've often taken measures to assume control, including things like issuing verbal orders to their personnel that maintenance activities are to go through Arlington County facilities. My big concern there is without an agreement prior in place, that Arlington County will be allowed to write checks from the city's checkbook, and that obviously cannot stand. A proposal's been made to have Arlington County share in some of the costs of facility maintenance. I think that's great, but it's my understanding that Arlington has countered that by asking the city to share in the costs of some additional full-time personnel. That basically will result in a cost offset to zero out the potential benefit while still giving Arlington additional control over the fire station facility. That naturally would concern me. Arlington has proposed to strip the volunteer fire chief of their authority as the chief officer here in the City of Falls Church. I find that this request has no basis and further reinforces a desire to suppress volunteer participation here in the city. I believe that Arlington would see a future where volunteers would only be allowed to perform menial tasks. It's unrealistic to have a highly trained and motivated membership and then expect that they will simply want to stand by without meaningful duties. I personally have a very different vision, one in which we continue to expand our service offerings to have advanced life support paramedics as volunteers, as well as frontline suppression capabilities on a very regular basis. As a city council, I'm asking for your attention to make sure that we make it clear that volunteers are a vital part of the city's emergency response posture, that the city should maintain the possession of acquisition of the ladder truck and the engine, and that I would offer that many of our members have a great deal of experience in specifying and buying fire apparatus, as well as handling large contract acquisitions in other realms as well. I ask that you please follow carefully the developments relating to the three-party agreement to ensure that the interests of both the city and your volunteer fire department are being met. And finally, before I close, I do want to recognize for everything that I've said here tonight that both the city manager and the assistant city manager and their staff have been strong supporters of our organization, and I do thank them for their service. I know that the negotiation of the three-party agreement has been tough, and I appreciate them including us and helping look out for us. Be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief. Council, any questions or comments? Vice Mayor Snyder?
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mayor. I would ask that we do some further work on this, that we communicate with Arlington County, we formally communicate these issues, that we hear from Arlington County, and that we take up some of these issues in the future to see where there can't be resolution. It seems to me that seated in front of us are people who are trained, anxious to serve the public, and yet are being denied the opportunity to do so for reasons which aren't entirely apparent, or if apparent, don't make sense. So that's certainly point number one. With regard to three-party agreement, I know that's in play, and I'll certainly ask the city manager to brief us in the future on that and where that's going to make sure that it is a true three-party agreement. With regard to the type of fire apparatus, if in fact it's being designed in a way that prevents the more than minimum staffing, that's crazy as well. The more resources, the better on the fire scene, as well as on an EMS call. Finally, there are models where the volunteers and professionals work extremely well in a unified system. Montgomery County, Maryland is one of those, and perhaps there are other examples throughout Virginia. So, I think these are serious issues and that go to the quality of fire protection. So I'd hope that, I would ask the city manager that these issues be formally communicated to Arlington, that we get a formal response, and that we carry on a thorough negotiation and discussion of these issues in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Other council members?
Yeah, I just have a question. Have these issues, I presume, been brought to the attention of the chief in Arlington? I mean, what do they say in response to these comments?
We've had discussions with various stakeholders, including the Arlington County Fire Chief and his staff on many occasions, and I would almost relate this to the death of 1,000 cuts. It's very difficult when you're dealing with a career organization of more than 300 when you are a volunteer organization of simply 50. They certainly have a very strong footprint here in the city, in that they have 33 personnel assigned to the station that are truly covering the 24/7, 365 needs of the everyday calls. And so when they make a policy, it's very difficult to challenge it on its very individual basis. But it's the collective nature of it that eventually adds up to kind of changing the value proposition for the average volunteer. And the problem that we're facing is people are seeing better opportunities in other jurisdictions. They're coming into our organization, they're being trained, and then they're looking to that opportunity elsewhere. And they're going on to great careers elsewhere.
Their own volunteer force?
There are some other volunteer organizations within Arlington County. They're fairly small, and I do think that does perhaps set a little bit on what their policy is, because they're just a completely different organization. structure than us. We are a very large organization with a lot of folks who are highly trained and certified. Some of the organizations struggle a little bit more with their numbers.
I would support Mr. Snyder's comments as well. I think we want to get to the bottom of it.
Other council members? Councilmember Campbell?
Excuse me. Put it bluntly, what's in it for Arlington to slowly asphyxiate the Falls Church volunteer firemen? Is it, other than just turf, what's in it for them?
I think there's by eliminating a volunteer force, I think there's a justification for a larger department and a larger dependence upon Arlington County for fire department resources. You also don't have anybody else to fall back on for other various ancillary needs. I'll give you an example. Memorial Day, we had volunteer staffing providing fire and EMS services for the entire event, for the entire day. It was about 25 individuals for the course of the day, and that cost the city absolutely nothing. I would argue that if Arlington County had to provide that same level of support, they would be billing the city overtime for that service. And that is an essential service. We were very fortunate yesterday that the weather was cool, and we only had one patient transport, but in the past, when the weather's been hot, there's been over 100 patient contacts during the course of the parade. You can't underscore enough, the need to safeguard individuals, under, stressful conditions like that.
Mr. Campbell?
Basically repeating what you said earlier, this would be a way of expanding the size of the force without paying for it, without coming out of the taxpayers.
I think it would make it easier to make an argument for additional overtime positions and perhaps
we would have to pay the cost.
additional expense to the city, absolutely. Yeah, as a volunteer organization, we have an independent funding stream. We manage the city's public safety budget for fire, outside of the personnel costs, of course, but we use that to help augment resource needs. In 2014, we're planning on the acquisition of a advanced life support medic unit, which is a vehicle that the volunteers will buy, but that the Arlington County paramedics will run as the first due medic unit from Station 6. That's $240,000 that's coming out of the volunteer revenue stream. If that wasn't available, then the city would have to pay that expense.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Other council members? And I just wanted to also echo the comments that have been made by Vice Mayor Snyder. Certainly I support what he said this evening about it. So thank you, Chief.
Thank
And
you very
if you would, keep us updated through the city manager as far as progress goes.
Thank you.
Why don't we have the volunteers join us for a photo?
Sure.
And again, just as a side note, Chief, thanks for you and the volunteers being out yesterday. I briefly had a chance to talk to you a bit, but you're absolutely right. It's the volunteers that make that such a safe event, along with our police
We
department and
always look
sheriff
forward
as
to
well.
that. Yep.
Take care.
I meant to call you, but they've been so busy. We'll do it.
And again, thank you, Chief, and also to Chief Gavin and to Sheriff Biddle for all of them making it a safe event. I know that we had some extra things going on, So, and I think that led for a very safe event, and good thing the weather also cooperated as well. So thank you all. And I have one speaker slip regarding the stormwater utility. I'm happy to take those comments now or when we get to that item. Why don't we hold it until we get to that item? Are there any members of the public that wish to address any items on the agenda or not on the agenda? So I'm going to hold that one comment over until we get to it. And any council member requests? And Kathy, I don't think we saw any written comments or summary. Okay. We're on to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor Baruch and members of council. I know that many council members want to speak to the Memorial Day festivities over the past weekend, but I just wanted to add my note of thanks to all who came to the city on Monday to help the city commemorate the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, and also take the opportunity to thank all those who helped pull this wonderful annual event off this year. Of course, Jenny Paxton is our event organizer, and her boss, Danny Schlitt, I think are at the core of all the staff activity for Memorial Day. But I also want to thank Harry Shovlin, who, with our local veterans groups, organized our Memorial Day ceremony. Thank Chief Gavin and our entire police department, Sheriff Biddle, and the deputies for keeping it a safe event from the fun run all the way through the parade, and Kathy Allen and the Public Works crews who set up the event and broke it down afterwards. And I don't know if anybody was out by dark on Park Avenue, but the streets were clean and you couldn't even tell that an event had happened here, that 5,000 people were lining the streets because the streets were so cleaned up by nightfall. And of course, Tom Polera with our emergency planning, and our Falls Church Volunteer Fire Department has already been thanked, but they are instrumental in helping the city be able to staff up and deal with a big event like this and to do it in a safe way. A very important part of all of our emergency response and our incident management. So thank you to all these folks who helped make this a great event. And of course, thank you, Mayor and Council, for the fabulous weather that we had. That's all I wanted to take the time to report on tonight, so we can get on to the agenda.
Any questions for the city manager? Mr. Taylor and then Mr. Barry.
I just want to comment why I thought there were at least 2 people on Park Ave who did recognize that it was all cleaned up by 6 o'clock.
Barry?
And I just wanted to thank the police officers who allowed me to ride in their van. I was a wee bit late, and got me to the front of the line. But as Mr. Snyder pointed out, I should really thank the officers for allowing me out of the van, because they had an option. They could have kept me locked in that thing, but they didn't. And thank you for letting me out of the van to participate.
Yeah.
There was a paddy wagon. Oh, you bet.
That was the, Mr. Mayor, that was the highlight of the day for me, was riding in the paddy wagon with the mayor. And he too.
I was in the front seat. I made sure
exactly,
of that.
Really. Yeah. I did want to say, not to rain on anyone's parade, but I understand some of the folks on Greenwich Street are going to have some questions and discussion about the hours during which they are not supposed to park in front of their houses, and whether those might be broader than are strictly speaking necessary. I think some tickets may have been issued. At any rate, we're not going to go into great detail, but I'm told to anticipate that there may be some discussions about that. So if once you hear that, you could just let us know if maybe we've thought about whether we really need to go 6 a.m. To 6 p.m. on all those residential streets or not. I would appreciate it. Thanks.
Anything else from council members? All right, thank you very much. We are on to business on the agenda. And council, what I propose that we do on the rush mark, we just add that into the business not on the agenda at the very end. Or actually, I take that back. We should probably add that in before consent. My apologies.
You want to add that as number 6 after TO 1313?
Yeah, I believe the motion wasn't clear on that, of where it should go. Mr. Foster, do we need another motion, or are we good just putting it as number 6? Let's just put it at number 6. So if we can read the first item.
Council, the first item before you is TO 13-14, ordinance to set the stormwater utility billing unit rate in accordance with Chapter 42, Article 7 of the Code of the City of Falls Church, Virginia.
And Council, I'll just provide a very brief introduction. There are 2 ordinances before the City Council. The first would set the stormwater utility fee at a rate of $18 per 200 square feet of impervious surface in the city, and the second ordinance would establish a credit policy by which, for taking certain actions, property owners can receive a credit against paying this proposed stormwater fee. This ordinance that's before the council is proposed to go into effect on January 1st, 2014, and the first billing would be in June 2014. The request is that the council adopt it before July 1st so that we have a full fiscal year with which we can go forth and begin to stand up this utility and do the work that is called for in the budget that's been adopted by the City Council on April 22nd, and the watershed management plan and our capital improvements program. 3 main points that we will emphasize in terms of how these resources will be used by the city to address needs. They will be used to meet increased regulatory requirements coming from the EPA as part of our Chesapeake Bay obligations. They will be going towards rehabilitation and reinvestment in an aging system to deal with spot flooding issues throughout the city and more frequent storm events. And also, thirdly, to deal with the increased maintenance that's needed given the fact that the system is aging and was largely built in an era about 60 years ago and now needs attention. Mr. Hicks will provide a staff report, and we do want the staff report to be for the community's benefit. The council is well-versed in all these issues, but just to make sure that the public is informed about what we're trying to accomplish with these funds, the need for them, and the process going forward. Mr. Hicks.
And I believe, just so we're clear on the process, I think we can talk about both items and then just vote each item is the way that we'd be doing it, because there's actually 2 separate actions that the council would be taking.
That is correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manager, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Before I get started, I wanted to acknowledge that I've got our Public Works Superintendent, Kathy Allen, here tonight. In case there are any questions, we can call upon Kathy to stand up and deliver. What is before you tonight is to proceed with the first reading of TO 13-14, which would establish a rate for the stormwater utility and schedule that for a public hearing on June 11th. Likewise, we would do the exact same thing for TO 13-15, which would establish a credit program for the stormwater utility fee. TO 13, we've gotten here from work. We spent about 2 years doing a watershed management plan. Came out, we adopted that, you adopted that, and that is now part of our everyday practice, implementing that plan. We spent the last year as a result of a resolution that you guys took, the council took, to examine possibilities to fund that plan moving forward, especially the capital problem and the increased regulation. So that brings us here tonight on April 22nd. This body adopted by ordinance a new stormwater utility that creates an enterprise fund for stormwater expenses and revenues within the city to manage our increased regulatory obligation, the aging infrastructure, both operationally and capital rehabilitation, reinvestment in the coming years, and the capital needed for the water quality aspects of the new regulations. So TO 13-14 sets the rate for that stormwater utility revenue that would come in. And that revenue would be set by TO 13-14 at $18 per 200 square feet of impervious cover on private parcels throughout the city. An average parcel in the city has 2,755 square feet of impervious cover, which translates to roughly a $252 annual expense. It would be billed on the real estate bill coming out twice a year. So you would pay half of that at each billing. That would raise $1,643,000 that would go into the program for implementation of the stormwater program. That would be used, we would leverage bond funding, debt funding, to be able to have approximately a $2 million capital program every year, with $1 million of that going to water quality expenses to meet our $15 million liability, and $1 million for conveyance improvements, meeting our $80 million liability over the next 50 to 80 years. It would also add 6.65 new positions for stormwater, dedicated to stormwater. That number, we're able to leverage the vacancies that will be created from the sale of the water system, leaving vacant positions in the sanitary sewer fund on January 1. So we're able to leverage hiring full-time people and job sharing between the stormwater program and the sanitary sewer program. We met last week and discussed, it was requested from the council to look at cost effectiveness. Instead of hiring these positions, could we consult out or contract out, bring people in from the outside, pay them by the hour to accomplish what's needed to meet these needs that are in stormwater. And starting on line 88, we lay out two examples. One of those examples is cleaning the entire system. We did this about 10 years ago at the cost of $1 million. The four-man crew that we aim to hire would be able to touch the entire system, touch and clean reaches as needed, but touch every single reach in the system, and that would cost us about $241,000. So the savings there is obvious. The second example we offer is about GIS, contracting that service out versus hiring internally. And we show that we have to do this work. We contract out right now to do some work, to bring in outside forces to do related GIS work, and we pay substantially more than we would pay for that particular position. So both of those show cost effectiveness, and we provide those as two examples. I'd like to move on to TO 13 unless we want to stop here and field any questions about TO 14 at this point.
Council, any questions on the first ordinance?
Okay. So the second ordinance is TO 13-15, which would establish a credit program. We have talked about the fee that would be billed every year. We would want, and we're obligated by state law to have a mechanism in place that a resident or a business can reduce that fee or take a credit for actions they do on their properties that benefits the program as a whole. So stormwater-related efforts on a parcel would meet a reduced fee. What we propose is a threefold credit program. We had a twofold credit program, but we've expanded it at your request upon input we received last week that we thought was extremely valuable. The first part of that is for any BMP that exists today, or any BMP that's be a best management practice, a structure in the ground that cleans up water quality on a private parcel. That would get a credit as long as it is in good standing is on our register and has a BMP agreement associated with it, which says it's privately owned and privately maintained. So that would reduce one's fee up to 30% of the impervious area that drains to that BMP. So if you've got 900 square feet that drain to a BMP that's registered, good standing BMP agreement, then you would only pay the rate on 600 square feet of that. Divide 900 by a third, subtract away. The second part of the credit program is a 10% reduction for what we call a SWIP, a Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. So on an industrial site, they might have a regulatory SWIP, regulatory industrial permit, that's managed by DEQ. They would automatically receive this 10% credit as long as we understand that it's out there. But we would also, for those who do not have an industrial permit, and certainly no one wants one, we would create a program that would be vetted through the Utility Commission and a stakeholder body to develop a menu of options that you could reduce nutrients on your property, manage hazardous waste in an appropriate manner, manage dog waste in an appropriate manner, and have outreach to the community. Those sorts of things, and we'd have a menu of options, and you'd choose from those, would gain you a 10% reduction on your entire bill. So you would apply for that. You would say, this is my Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, my SWIP, and we would approve it, you would execute it, and you would receive a discount. And each year you would renew that with DPW. Then the last, or the third area of credit is one that's brand new to discuss tonight, and it was suggested last week, and that is we have flooding concerns in the city. What happens if a private entity, whether it's through the development process or outside of the development process, wants to detain or retain water on their site in addition to what would be required by code? Now, we know we have water quality obligations by code, and you have to meet that regardless. But if you go above and beyond that, through this proposed program, we would give you up to a 30% discount. So you would have on a sliding scale, and this is where a lot of hydraulics and hydrology would have to be discussed to lay out the details of this program. But we'll lay out a program that says if you treat your site in addition to code compliance, you take it back to maybe a forested condition, or you treat off-site waters, that reduces our need to contain water off-site, the city's obligation, then we would give you 30% for that, or up to 30% based on a sliding scale. So that is the credit program. That program would be fleshed out in terms of guidelines and vetted with the Utility Commission and a stakeholder body to make sure everybody is on the same page. But those are the fundamentals that it would be codified by the ordinance before you tonight. So 30% for water quality structural BMPs meeting the standard that exists today, 10% for a SWIP, and 30% for that detention or retention for quantity control above and beyond the code. And I'll field any questions.
Thank you, Bill. Questions? Member Callen?
Thank you, Bill. The credits, in fact, if I recall, in your budget, you have up to a certain maximum amount, right? Because if everybody was wonderful and did everything, you'd have 10 people paying for the whole.
Right.
So there is another limit on top of the.
Right. So Mr. Kalin is exactly right, that the more people take the credit, the more the burden exists on those who are actually the ratepayers and are paying. We have set aside within the rate that's suggested at $18 per 200 square foot of impervious cover, we've set aside $100,000, and that $100,000 from year one is available to pay out for credit. A potential site could take 30% for all of the impervious area that they drain to, an additional 10%, and an additional 30% beyond. That would be the max. So you could actually max out the credit at 70%. So you'd still have a 30% obligation to the program. But we believe that there's a strong nexus between the 30% for the water quality obligation with the program that exists. We're going to spend 30% of this $1.6 million on water quality benefit to the city. We believe that about 30% is going to be this detention obligation that's built into the program. So we think there's a strong nexus there. So you could get a maximum of 70% if you did everything perfectly. We bought in, maintained 100%. But you would still have a 30% obligation.
Other council members, Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The 1.6, thank you, Bill. The 1.6 million and change that's raised, what percentage of that comes from residential versus business properties? Have you told us that?
I have told you that, but I don't have it memorized. And what I could do is be prepared to bring that back in 2 weeks. I cannot tell you that tonight off the top of my head.
Okay, that'd
But
be nice.
we have talked about it over
Right, I thought we'd heard it, but it's just a nice to know thing. What I'd really like to spend a minute or two on is some of the things I brought up at the work session last time. Okay, so on line 168, we're talking rain barrels, cisterns, rain gardens, xeriscaping, all these things that you can do to achieve environmental objectives as well as economic benefits. I guess my question is, those kinds of measures, commendable, look like the kind of thing that maybe some of the younger generation of homeowners might be more familiar with, more able to implement, more comfortable considering. My concern is, I guess, homeowners who've been here longer, maybe they have some of the older homes with the bigger land area. Maybe they're not so familiar with the things that are being talked about here. I'm trying to get some feel for how your staff structure is going to be able to reach out to people who are interested in doing good environmentally and saving a buck too, and taking as many of these steps as they possibly can. Because I think if we don't, really help them, really have a proactive effort to do that, then basically it's not really a user fee. It's a tax by another name. I mean, a user fee is something that you can choose or not to do, therefore you can pay or not. And I would like to get us more in that direction, particularly with that special population of folks who we are hearing from with some concerns.
So the city there's two things that exist today that just come to my mind right now. The first thing is that we have a stormwater engineer, and he's made himself available after big events. He's made himself available on a daily basis, that when he gets a call, somebody says, I have a drainage issue on my property, he's been able to go out, talk those problems through with those folks, and work towards a solution. So what you're going to have is 2.65 more of those people who are available to have those conversations. So that's excellent. We also have a very strong communication staff, and we have worked with them to develop all of the information that I hope each of you have availed yourselves of on our website. There's a lot of information there, but we know that not everybody gets their information that way. So very similar to our floodplain management program, we send out flyers to people who live in the floodplain. We send them out beyond that. We use our environment newsletter that comes out multiple times every year. We will continue that work, and we will do it better because we'll have more forces to do it with. The second thing I want to say is Kathy Allen has been very involved in a rain barrel program that the city has been a leader in the 4 jurisdictions that are around this area with Alexandria and Falls Church and Fairfax County. Those rain barrels, how many events each year? 6 or 7 events every year, and a lot of those are sell the barrel. All you got to do is pick it up. You pay a price, you pick it up, you take it home. Those exist today. No credit for that, but that's part of this program. So with outreach, with staff availability, with these rain barrel built-in programs that have been well established for 10 plus years, you've got a program you can build on. I think there's opportunities there.
That's good, thank you. So I'm glad you mentioned the rain barrels. other jurisdictions that we've looked at in setting our plan up, is there any precedent for, it was mentioned at the work session the other day that the refuse and recycling program has been by and large well accepted because people got a refuse can and a recycling can given to them, a big one if they wanted it, or I guess the default was big, or a smaller one if they asked. Is there any precedent or other jurisdiction that is trying to make those rain barrels, which seem to me like, you know, the main currency of this new program from a residential property owner's point of view, more available at a lower price or free to certain people who would qualify based on standards that you might develop as staff?
I'm not familiar with that per se. I do know that there are some watersheds. I know up in Pennsylvania there was a big program to try and push rain barrels out beyond. I want to be clear that rain barrels are one tool in a very big toolbox of a lot of tools. And we believe that there's a strong outreach component associated with that, and maybe it's worth subsidizing every rain barrel that goes out. Maybe it's not. But I can tell you this, if we're going to solve our problems for flooding, it is not about rain barrels individually. Your rooftop will fill that rain barrel up very quickly, and the flooding problems that we have in 4 Mile Run are not measured in the gallons per minute, but in cubic feet per second that pass under those bridges. But they are definitely a part of it, and we can work to say, we've done a huge job here in Falls Church, and this council believes that maybe there's a bigger role for rain barrels, but they really should be thought of as one tool in a toolbox.
Good, understand, yeah. I'm fully aware of that and appreciate your education on that matter. It is something that I think would help with public acceptance, and, you know, that's a lot of the battle. Obviously, the environmental impact is limited, but, you know, public acceptance counts for something, and so that's something I would encourage you to look at as you implement the plan. That's why I voted for it, because I understand that we need to do big things, and you know, we are going to do big things. We're giving you money, and we're letting you hire people, and that's good. But sometimes the small things make people feel better about the big things that they have to do.
Kathy Allen just pulled my ear while I was up here, and she mentioned to me that they are working in concert with the other 3 jurisdictions to figure out a way to subsidize for lower income households. So they're way ahead of me.
If I keep talking here, they're going to be free before we finish. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Bill.
I might
Kathy,
pay you
too.
today.
Other council members? Questions at this point? All right, why don't we open it up for public comments, and then we'll take a motion on the 2 items. So the speaker slip that I have is from Mr. John Lamoni. Mr. Lamoni?
Good evening. My name is John Lamoni, and I live on 304 Great Falls Street. I want to commend the council for, at long last, addressing this major but long neglected and badly needed rehabilitation, repair, and adequate maintenance of the city's stormwater sewer system by passing Ordinance 1892 to create the new Stormwater Enterprise Fund. I urge you now to take the next step to finally implement and help fund the system by setting the utility fee linked to the impervious surface and determining the parameters for the offsetting credits. Once operational, the Stormwater Enterprise Fund, with sufficient dedicated staff and adequate financial resources, will provide important benefits to all residents of the city, including businesses and other groups conducting activities in Falls Church. At the risk of repetition of others, what's been said, these benefits include specifically reducing risks to public health and public safety and mitigating damage to private property. I know that there are opinion leaders in the, some opinion leaders in the community who've questioned the need for this utility. But I think city staff has carefully documented and made public extensive information on the existing poor physical condition of the existing stormwater infrastructure and the fact that a significant significant portion of the system, I believe this is on the order of 30%, but I stand to be corrected, has or soon will have surpassed its expected lifespan. Failure to promptly and sufficiently address this issue can be expected to accelerate existing problems with significant attendant costs. I will try to quickly reiterate some of these costs that have been made known to the public, but I think are worth repeating. Street flooding causes from improperly designed or deteriorating stormwater conveyances certainly present a traffic hazard, and I've personally witnessed cars just a few hundred yards from here who almost turned over when encountering sudden and unexpected flooding on Great Falls Street. Sinkholes in cities and sidewalks resulting from damaged portions of the stormwater system pose significant hazards to both automobiles and pedestrians. We have not had a major sinkhole like the District of Columbia did last week, but if one looks at some of the photos posted on the city's official website, I think they vividly demonstrate that such hazards are not imaginary here in the city. Public health. Exposing citizens to raw sewage in public areas, streams, and private homes when stormwater backup places excessive demands on the capacity of the sewerage system poses a very, very important hazard to public health. This is stuff of hepatitis, typhoid, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases. The increasing incidence of chronic flooding problems, and these have been brought to the attention of staff and council, have caused considerable damage to private property. This is a hidden and highly inequitable tax imposed on citizens and businesses in this city. And finally, of course, the city will face considerable fines if we don't meet the mandates that have been put in place by, as mentioned by the EPA. Now, as far as the design of the funding requirement, which you're going to discuss tonight, I think the proposed creation of a fee linked to impervious surface would appear to be the fairest method for helping to fund the utility, but has the added benefit of creating appropriate incentives for mitigating future increases in stormwater runoff. I do see a problem in the area of incentives in the design of the ordinance 1892. I specifically will refer you to section 42.244, which appears to waive any incentive for federal, state, or local governments to limit future increases in impervious surfaces on property owned by such entities, or offset the impact on stormwater runoff from future increases in such surfaces. Now, I'm aware of the planned project aimed at reducing the chronic flooding that's generated by the city campus, but I don't see any language in Ordinance 1892 that would deter future city actions leading to increases in stormwater runoff on this campus or other city properties, including schools, parks, and so forth. Consequently, I would urge the council to design an effective mechanism to limit or at least to fully offset the effect of any future increases in impervious surfaces on all city-owned and school properties other than public streets that would intensify existing stormwater runoff. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to address these two items? Not seeing any, I'm going to go ahead and close this to public comment. Kathy, did we receive any comments on this? Council, any comments before, or any questions lingering before we take a motion? Vice Mayor Snyder?
Just a quick couple comments, and I'll stay within the 4 minutes, I promise.
That's why I suggested the lights.
That's right. For those, that's right.
What's that?
For those of us who attended the town hall meeting after the Tropical Storm Lee and the flooding that resulted in there, I think all of us were impressed with the need to act to bring the stormwater system up to the current demands and the climatic conditions. Secondly, the fees are based on water generation, which after looking at various approaches seems to be the one that is most forward-looking. Third, the credits have been worked on and will probably continue to be worked on, but to the extent we can reward activities, both present and future, that will result in less runoff, that's a good thing. Finally, we know we need to comply with increasingly severe requirements from EPA. I want to thank the council, the staff, and the citizens who have helped shape this. And I do think going forward there may well be some additional refinements and fine-tuning of the program. And because we're setting the basis of the fee doesn't necessarily mean 100% of that will be an added fee. That's something that we can work through in the future, depending on how we fund the exposure, what I would call the exposure or fee units. I think that's still, we still have some options there as to how to do that. We may need to do more phasing in, not sure. I am concerned about the potential effects on some businesses, but we'll need to continue to work through those issues, and we're moving this forward for further community discussion and further refinement along the lines that I've indicated, and that seems to be the way that most of the opinion in the community says we should be going. Thank you.
Thank you. Other council members? Again, this is something that I had been pushing for I think since I was first elected to council in 2008, as I was walking through neighborhoods that have been hit off and on with stormwater, and then you add the state and federal requirements on top of that with water quality. So I think this is a step definitely in the right direction. I'll definitely be supporting it. Share Vice Mayor Snyder's thoughts that some of this needs to be fine-tuned a little bit, but I think it's definitely getting there, and look forward to further public comments on this before it comes back. Bill, I did have a question for you, or perhaps a comment. I think the 30% credit has been added, and I just want to make sure I understood what I read correctly, and that's essentially it's an incentive to provide 30% if a developer, et cetera, chooses to either detain more of the water than they would be required on their site, or if they want to improve the quality of the water coming through their site. Is that?
No, it is just for the former. If the former is quantity control for flood control, essentially, downstream impacts, that is what that additional 30% is for, above and beyond the requirements. The water quality portion, the treatment of the water, making sure it's cleaner, is not eligible for that additional 30%. Just quantity control.
Got it. So if they're just going beyond what the code requires,
Right.
would they get that benefit? Okay.
Just for quantity.
Okay, and it sounds like you had an opportunity to discuss that with our consultants. Has that, I know this came up just last week, has this been discussed with the business community as well?
We have not discussed that with the business community. There's certainly opportunities between now and the second reading to have that conversation.
Okay. And would this potentially affect the developments that have been approved so far?
So interestingly, I've met with one of those developers just this afternoon. We discussed at length what would be available to them after they, instated whatever they're going to do on site. So we are absolutely talking to the current developers.
Okay, but as far as what the nitty-gritty of this would be, given that they're planning on bringing site plan forward very soon, does the timing mesh up with when they plan on doing site plan and when the details of this would be in effect so they could take advantage of it?
We believe that it does.
Okay. I think that's extremely important because both projects that I'm alluding to are rather large, and 30%, to Mr. Duncan's point, residential may not be a big deal as far as dollars and cents, but for a large mixed-use redevelopment, it could be very substantial on infill that they're already doing. So I hope we calibrate that correctly to provide those incentives. And then secondly, I believe at the work session, we discussed sort of the flip side of this, which is more of addressing our code, the underlying code, sort of the stick, if you will, and placing requirements in, not just incentives. So I think there was support to bring that forward in short order. My view is we sort of need both as we're trying to calibrate this, so I would hope that we could bring that legislation forward before the other projects begin their site plan process.
We believe that'll be before you in June.
Do we think that's going to be then before when we're going to start seeing the site plans come in? Mr. Shields?
The site plan adoptions certainly are going to be after that. Whether they come in before that, all the developers are saying they want to come in with the site plans as fast as they possibly can. So.
I just think that needs to be calibrated. We have opportunities to do good work here. I mean, it's rare that we have two big projects that are utilizing large land masses, that lots of impervious surface. So having the carrot and the stick, I think, are really important in trying to calibrate the timing. It's great that we've got all of the development interest happening right now. We just should do everything we can to move on both fronts of this. So I just want to get a sense of council. Is council okay with trying to advance once Bill comes up with the language on the stick side to try to get that moving on the agenda? Okay. So not hearing any objections. So Bill, if you can get us that language, and I'll work with Wyatt to try to get that moving very quickly so it does not get behind what's happening on the development side. And we don't want them to be surprised. We don't want them to be in the middle of site plan and we approve something and they have to restart site plan. That's just not good for the city and is not business friendly. So we shouldn't be doing this. We should be doing it up front where they know.
One of the great things about a small staff is we're the same people reviewing those plans, so we're talking to them all the time.
Great. Anything else by council members? Vice Mayor Snyder?
One final thing, one of our citizens, John Lamoni, a minute ago mentioned the city's role in preventing its own runoff. I'm assuming that with staff and with a greater awareness that we're going to build that into our thinking in the future more.
What I think that the concern is already addressed in that you have a zoning ordinance. Whenever you go beyond 2,500 square feet of disturbed area, you have to meet Chesapeake Bay, you have to meet the water quantity controls as well through the grading plan or site plan process. So all of that is in place right now. I believe that what Mr. Lamone referred to in the ordinance is the exemption for the fees, and that comes from the state enabling legislation, which specifically excludes those. But if you are going to do an expansion of Aurora House today, presumably it would be beyond 2,500 square feet. At that point, you're going to be obligated to meet the water quality and the water quantity controls that already exist in the zoning ordinance, or you're going to have to publicly say you're not doing it. So I think it's already there.
And that would apply to both city and school buildings, is that right?
Yes, although all of the school buildings, at least right this moment, except for TJ, are in Fairfax County. And they would have to meet Fairfax County's code, but once they're in the city, that would change.
Mr. Taylor?
Dave, I don't know if you were here or not, but that was a question I had specifically asked you in one of the work sessions, was precisely the issue related to the regulation of city property. We went, now, Bill has mentioned the same thing, but what we also, as we pursued it, it's a self-regulated process. There really isn't any specific set of sanctions or somebody checking to see whether the city is conforming to its own ordinances and zoning. That was the open question. I don't think we had a resolution, but we had discussed actually precisely this point at a work session, if my recollection is correct.
So have I answered it?
Well, the issue was still open about what and I think it gets to perhaps Mr. Lamoni's point, yes, there's zoning there, but who is monitoring the city to make sure?
So,
it's being actually
right now, the current Chesapeake Bay Code and the floodplain code, that sits in the zoning ordinance. The new stormwater ordinance that will be before you in the coming weeks pulls that out of the zoning ordinance, but even for the sake of how it works today, is that Public Works oversees that work, and we use a Chesapeake Bay internal review team that includes our stormwater engineer, our arborist, and and a member of the planning department, the development services department. And they review every project that is beyond 2,500 square feet, whether it's a big site plan or a small grading plan, or anything that occurs, even a building permit, but anything that occurs in the RPA, in the resource protection area. All of that goes through there. And if you're not going to meet the requirements, then that has to be specifically accepted. And so I think that exists very much in the code today and will moving forward in the new stormwater code.
All right, anything else, Councilman? All right, if I can get a motion, please. And this is, we'll do each one separately.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve TO 13-14 on first reading, schedule public hearing, and second reading for June 10, 2013, and advertise the same according to law.
If I can get a second on that motion, please. Mr. Kalin on the second.
Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalin? Mr. Pepe? Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tarter? Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, council.
If I can get a motion on the second item.
Mayor, I move to approve TO 13-15 on first reading, schedule public hearing, and second reading for June 10, 2013, and advertise the same according to law.
Thank you. If I can get a second. Mr. Kalin on the second. If I can have the roll call.
Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalin? Mr. Pepe? Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tarter? Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, council. The next item before you, council, TR 13-17, resolution to endorse WMATA's Momentum, the next generation of Metro strategic plan.
Council, I'll just provide a very short staff report on this. Council is asked to adopt this resolution in advance of the WMATA board's planned adoption of the Momentum Plan, which is scheduled for June 13th of 2013. This is the strategic plan for WMATA for its targeted investments to expand transit and to maintain its existing plant. The city council had a briefing from WMATA staff on this in the winter months, and the city, under the signature of the Vice Mayor Snyder, wrote a letter to WMATA with comments and requests to WMATA for their consideration. We did receive a point-by-point response to that letter, and that's attached in the packet. With that brief introduction, I would ask if Mr. Snyder might be able to speak to any comments he might have on this, and we're here to answer any questions. If Vice Mayor Snyder wants to,
Which Snyder? The planner or the something else?
I was referring to you, but we're here to answer any further questions on this item as well.
Well, just having been delayed for half an hour, I'm not sure I'm in a good frame of mind for supporting this, but that may justify actually why we're doing it. I would suggest we may want to add another whereas clause in 102, something along the lines of whereas it is intended that Momentum will improve both safety and reliability of the metro system, comma, which I think makes the point that it's not just about expansion. They need to take care of the current system, and then you need to make sure it works. So that would be my suggestion. And with that, I would urge approval of this proposal.
Mr.
Other
Snyder, would
council
you
members?
repeat that, please?
Where, it would be in line 102, whereas, comma, it is intended that Momentum, the next generation of Metro, will result in improved reliability and safety of Metro.
Barry?
Yes, I wanted to reference Mr. Snyder's letter on behalf of the city to WMATA. I thought it was obviously extremely well-written and to the point, because we talk about expansion, but we don't talk about the integrity of the system, the effectiveness of the system. The bigger, in this case, is not necessarily better. So to Mr. Snyder's point, it's not, it makes little sense to emphasize an expanded system if you can't talk about an integrated system that actually moves people effectively and efficiently through the metropolitan Washington area. So I particularly thank Mr. Snyder for the very cogent remarks about Route 7 and how that can be made a far more effective conduit for transportation in the city. Thanks.
Thank you. Other council members? Councilmember Campbell?
Thank you. Two comments. The more serious of the two is, if I recall, the briefing or whatever, the review that you described, why it was really a sales pitch, because they were coming up, this was going to lead to $27 billion in additional costs over I don't know how many years. And while this letter itself doesn't cost anything, it'll be interesting to find out what we're going to be on the hook for as part of this $27 billion, or whatever it finally turns out to be. As someone who regularly used the city's metro system from 1970 to 2007, 2008, I can see, in terms of delays and so forth, that I was a willing participant in a group of us who got stuck in a train so long that we started to chant, "Free the Metro 200."
Other council members? And before we take a motion on this, as I've previously alluded to on this item and the next item, given my employment with the federal government, my name shouldn't appear on any documents going to the federal government or federal courts. So, all right, if I can get a motion, then we'll open this up for public, or actually, why don't we open this up for any public comments before we take a motion? I didn't have any speaker slips on this. Are there any members of the public that wish to address this item? Not seeing any, I'm going to go ahead and close this item. Kathy, did we receive anything in writing? If I can get a motion, please. Ms. Berry? Or Vice Mayor Snyder?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TR 13-17 as amended with the following language in line 102, whereas, comma, it is intended that Momentum, the next generation of Metro, will result in improved reliability and safety of the Metro system.
Thank you. If I can get a second, please.
Second.
Ms. Berry on the second. And Mr. Snyder, or Vice Mayor Snyder, rather, thank you very much for your work on this issue and also on all the various transportation issues. I know it's been a very, very busy year on transportation matters. And also, I believe Mr. Pepe and Mr. Carter that have been also helping track some of these items as well. Mr. Taylor?
Just a correction, Kathy, it was 1979, not 1970. Thank you.
And that was Mr. Snyder who made the motion, and was it Ms. Berry who did the second?
That's right.
I'll call the roll. Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalin? Mr. Pepe? Mr. Snyder? Mr. Charter? Mayor Brooke?
Yes.
Thank you, council.
You can have a reading of the next item.
Next item before you. TR 13-18, resolution to adopt the City of Falls Church Title VI.
And I would just note, as I'm providing a staff report on this, that Paul Stoddard is our acting transportation coordinator for the city, who is filling the very big shoes of Wendy Block Sanford, but has been doing a fantastic job. And the previous item, as well as this item, and moving all of our many transportation initiatives forward. It actually is a very exciting time in the area of transportation with a lot of policy work that is underway, and Paul is doing a great job on that. Council was requested with this resolution to formally adopt our Title VI policy, and this was a policy that is required that we adopt in conjunction with our use of FTA funds, specifically for the intermodal station, which we're getting underway. But we've also needed to be in compliance with this in the past for prior FTA grants that we've expended. What is new, however, is the need for the council to actually adopt and endorse our Title VI policies. And specifically what they lay out are our policies with respect to compliance with the Civil Rights Act to ensure that the city is making its resources and expending these funds in a way that follows federal law for equality and equal access to transportation services and all the other aspects that are covered in the Civil Rights, in the Federal Civil Rights Act. So with that overview, this would be part of our annual audit as showing our compliance with this, and the council is asked to adopt this resolution. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Council members, and before we get started, just on this, I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion of this. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to talk to my ethics office about this, given that there's some federal issues here. So I just out of absolute prudence, I'm going to just recuse and not involve myself with the discussion and let you all discuss it. And again, as I mentioned before, my name definitely should not be associated with documents going to the federal government or the courts on this matter or any other matter. Other council member? Ms. Barry?
Mr. Shields, I just want to be clear what I'm looking at. We have a revised document in
Yes.
front of us, and that's the document we're looking at right
Yeah,
now.
the document that you're being asked to adopt has the red text revised, and the revisions, we don't believe are substantive in change, but they address some of the language and the requirements that the NVTC recommends that we include in our policy. So additional work late last week and over the weekend has resulted in this revised document.
And I'm sorry, I was confused about your reference to the Civil Rights Act because I was looking at ADA. What, we're talking about ADA language, not, I mean, unless this is.
It's both. But it's specifically Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
I'm sorry, okay.
And so what it is about is non-discrimination, fostering equal access to transportation resources or transportation assets, full and fair participation by all affected populations, making sure that notices are in multiple languages, that there's full access to what it is we're doing here with these FTA funds by all of our population.
Okay, I think.
And I've asked Vice Mayor Snyder to take over this section.
Thanks very much. Any further comments from council? I'll entertain a motion and then open it to the public.
Mr. Vice Mayor, I move to adopt TR 13-18 as revised.
Is there a second? Okay, motion's been duly made and seconded. We'll open the matter to the public. Madam Clerk, have we received anything in writing? Does any member of the public wish to address us on this item? There being none, the public hearing is closed. Any further discussion on the part of council? Madam Clerk, will you call the roll on TR 13-18? The motion is to adopt it as revised.
Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalen?
Yes.
Mr. Pepe? Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tartar? And Mayor Brug?
Abstain.
You abstain.
Yeah,
Thank you.
For the reasons I provided, as a matter of
That
prudence.
item passes unanimously.
I
Thank
got
you,
that.
with one abstention.
Thank you. We are on to the resolution to adopt the City of Falls Church title, or I'm sorry,
The next
I'm now doing the clerk's
13
job.
PO 13-13, ordinance to amend the FY 2013 budget of expenditures and revenues of the general fund and the capital improvement fund by appropriating grant revenues, miscellaneous revenues, contingencies, and underspending in certain categories. On first reading, council.
And there were some revisions made to this that were in our packets today.
A
and
very
the
minor revision. There was a typo, so there, that's what the revision
typo.
is.
Thank you.
Mr. LeCondra will point that out.
Happy Tuesday, Council.
Happy Tuesday.
As our clerk has stated, this is a ordinance to amend the 2013 budget. Since the work session, there were some changes made. We found during the course of working with departments that some public safety issues came to our attention that we thought needed to be addressed with this budget amendment. We increased the revenue from permits by $150,000 to cover those costs. Those costs include $50,000 for overtime for public safety, $50,000 for vehicle maintenance for public safety, and we added additional funding for building safety inspection services. If you like, I will go over those other items that we covered in work session, but the major change was adding the $150,000 of permit fees and covering those three items that I've mentioned. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Council members, any questions? Councilmember Cameron?
Thank you. No, I agree with this. It's fine as far as I'm concerned. I have one question, Richard. On line 76, it says the balance of contingency funds is 0, which is fine for 13. I'm just curious, was any balance and contingencies projected into the FY14 budget, or is it assumed to be 0 in the 14 budget as a carryover?
There was no carryover, but we did set aside, I believe, $109,000 for contingency in the 14 budget.
In addition, that was not part of this calculation.
Has nothing to do with this.
Thank you.
Other council members? Councilmember Tarder?
I have a question. You just said you'd added, I can't remember, was it 150 for permits, $150,000 for permits?
Yes.
Is that new revenue?
Yes.
So that's in anticipation of fees increasing going forward?
No, it is not.
It's from this past year?
It is based on current revenues versus what was budgeted. And we do know that there is additional revenue coming in during the next month because of increased activity. That's all it is.
So this is fees that you've already accrued because there's been more activity, and then there's an anticipation based on what you've already observed that there'll be more activity in the next whatever months it is of the fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Other council members? Everybody good? If I can get a motion.
Just to be clear, though, we do anticipate more, but that's not what's included here. It's in addition to this 150. We'll get back to you.
Mr. Cameron?
To add a clarification, which we're well aware, no numbers are included in the budget of that nature until they're actually received. You don't say, well, we expect that the project will be completed by X date. No. It has to be value dated in our account, and then it gets, just to clarify.
Anticipated based on previous activity. In other words, what's anticipated in the next month or two, as you just said, which seems a little different than what you just said, Ira, which is money actually received.
All right, let me say it again. We budgeted approximately $570,000 for permits. As of today, we're well over $770,000. Yes, we do anticipate more revenue coming in due to increased activity in the next month, but it is not part of this budget amendment. That's correct.
All right. I'd like to open this item up for public comment. Not seeing any speaker slips on this. Are there any members of the public that wish to address this item? Ms. Bashad, did we receive any written comments on this item? I'm going to go ahead and close this item up for public comment. Council, if I can get a motion on this, please.
Mayor, I move to approve TO 13-13 on first reading, schedule second reading and public hearing for June 10, 2013, and advertise the same according to law.
Thank you. If I can get a second. Mr. Kalin on the second. Any comments on this before we take the vote? Can I have the roll call vote, please?
On the budget amendment, Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalin? Yes. Mr. Pepe? Yes. Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tartar? Mayor Bruk?
Yes.
Thank you, council. The next item that has been added to the agenda, I believe, is TO 13-19. Is that correct? Yes.
Yeah, that is correct. Sorry.
TR 13.
I just
TR
want to
13-19.
And I just want to clarify for council, what is this that we're getting now?
Council is getting a packet right now that has the resolution that you were provided at the beginning of the meeting, and then attached to it are supporting documents. And those supporting documents include the final approved voluntary concessions that the council agreed to and the developer agreed to on May 13th. It includes the amended voluntary concessions dated May 28th. In other words, what the developer is requesting now. It includes the resolution that the council adopted on May 13th. Number 4, it includes the council's legislative action for May 13th. So just the summary of what the council did on the 13th. Number 5 is the actual letter from Patrick Carney of Rushmark requesting the change to the voluntary concessions that this resolution would affect. And then 6 is an attachment of the conceptual development plan for parking, which we're dating May 28th. And that actually is the conceptual plan for parking that was circulated months ago by the developer as a potential for moving the drive aisle for the Harris Teeter interior to the garage. What the developer is going to speak to the council momentarily, and he's going to speak to this issue and his commitment to propose a site plan that reflects the drive aisle being interior to the garage. This was addressed in the council's resolution and in the initial action back on May 13th, that the developer shall study this for an additional 30 days to attempt to find a solution that would take that traffic away from the property line and move it interior to the garage. So effectively, the developer has studied it and has determined that it is feasible and is committing to do that. In addition, the developer is now asking for the change of the voluntary concessions, which effectively would bring the voluntary concessions back to where they initially were proposed to the City Council on May 13th. The wording is slightly different, but the substance of them is the same. And so specifically what the developer is requesting is that the restrictions on truck deliveries for the commercial space, that as voluntary concession number 11, truck delivery and loitering, would read, and this is at line 88 in the whereas of the resolution, that it would read, the developer agrees to restrict the times of truck deliveries serving the commercial space to between the hours of 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and between the hours of 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Sundays and federal holidays. Additionally, between the hours of 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Saturdays, tractor-trailer and trash truck delivery and pickup will be prohibited. So effectively what this does is it allows deliveries between 7 and 9 a.m. on Saturday morning with trucks that are not tractor-trailers. So single chassis trucks, that is the difference between what is proposed here and what was adopted on May 13th. That is the packet that's before the council, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about that.
Just wanted to make sure that, I know that Mr. Foster was working up some language, and there's been a variety of things handed out, that I just wanted to make sure that Mr. Foster has gotten us language, or if he needs a brief recess, I was not sure.
Yeah, I had drafted up a motion, Mr. Mayor, and in the excitement of getting ready for this meeting, trying to address multiple things, I left that on my desk.
Well, actually, it has been distributed. The council should have that draft motion that the city attorney developed. It actually is a prelude to the motion. The motion would be as proposed here in the staff report. What the city attorney has drafted is
It's a lead-in, sorry to
statement
interrupt.
prior to the motion.
Was the city attorney also working on something that was tying the drive aisles and the hours together in the VCs, other than the motion? And I know that there's the whereas clauses, but that's just the commitment. Was there anything explicitly that tied the two together other than the commitment?
Well, it is the commitment, and it's clear in the resolution at 95 that that commitment to the drive aisle is memorialized there. It's also referenced in the lead-in motion that I understand from the city manager is in front of you. And so if the developer were to fail to satisfy that commitment, the city would have a legal basis to refuse to issue certificates of occupancy or other permits because the developer had not complied with the voluntary concessions as well as the resolution that's laid out here.
Would that settle the issue as far as the planning commission as well?
That's correct. I mean, if the planning commission were to deviate from that and, for example, attempt to remove the drive aisle from the site plan, that would create potential problems with respect to the project, and that it's been laid out here that developers committed to that.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Foster. All right. So did the applicant want to make any comments and walk us through anything? I mean, I think it's all in the packet. I think the new thing is the hours, which are pretty self-explanatory. The other may just be the drive aisles.
I don't really need to add anything. I think he kind of covered the whole issue. I'm comfortable with what the resolution's put forward. This is really clean up from the committee meeting. I don't think there's any groundbreaking going on here, so.
Anything as far as the drive aisles that you want to comment on?
No, we're committed to doing it. The tenant has approved it. We had our meeting today with VDOT on the left turn lane that was corresponding with that went pretty well, I thought, with Bill Hicks. And everything's going as we're hoping it's going to go on this. We're trying to get the site plan filed as soon as possible.
And just to note that I had neglected to brief the council on that. There was a meeting today with VDOT, with city staff, with the developer staff, and with the VDOT folks who will review the application for the waiver. We think the meeting went very well. I do think that the VDOT is looking very much to the city for what the city wants to have happen here, and so the council's resolution and the council speaking on this was important to that. So I can report on a positive meeting no approvals granted, certainly, but a good start to the process.
Any questions before we open this up for public comment? Mr. Carter?
Questions, if I could. So the tractor trailer trucks, and I guess all the trucks are going to be loading, are they going to be loading through this drive aisle? Is that how it's going to be now?
There are two drive aisles. There's now only proposed a truck drive aisle that is closest to the neighborhood. We moved the commercial retail drive aisle over into the garage curb cut into the thing.
But so as originally proposed, the truck drive aisle was close to the neighbors.
It still is.
It still is?
Yes.
So they're going to basically be coming as they've always come?
Yes.
That hasn't changed? How the trucks are going to come to and fro to this project has not changed at all?
Correct.
Okay. Is there any issue whether the noise is going to be visible, or not visible, but audible outside the walls of this drive aisle they're going to be coming in? I know the drive aisle is kind of sealed.
There's no different issue than's been part of this project from the beginning, and that's why we enclosed the loading dock and did all the other things we did to help mitigate that. So we're not changing anything with that regard at this point.
I understand you're not changing it, but are you confident, or your architect confident, that in fact there will be not noise emanating from the drive aisle, the enclosed drive aisle?
I think we're going to mitigate it to the best we can. I can't promise that there won't be noise, but I think we're doing the best we can to try and mitigate it. We've made that commitment to the neighborhood.
Okay, I'm just curious as to whether the enclosing of it really does dampen it down significantly.
Oh, yes, yes.
I would figured it would, but I just thought you
We're
might
going to have
better.
acoustic studies and some other things, and I think through the AARB and through the site plan committee, site plan process, we'll get deeper into that issue, but we're
Okay.
committed to that.
Okay. I have a question about, this is more for staff, about the actual language of the 11, condition 11 or VC 11. It talks about the developer agrees to restrict the times of truck deliveries, which to me they're using sort of different terminology. At one point later on, you say tractor trailer, and I don't know if that's supposed to modify truck or it's just tractor trailers. I wonder if the word all truck deliveries should go in front, the word all should go in front of the word truck deliveries in the first sentence, because there's different terminology used. There's tractor trailers, there's trash truck terminology, and just to make it clear that there are no trucks basically before 7 a.m.
That's the intent, yes.
I mean, I would think it might be a little more clear by sticking the word all in front of truck deliveries in the first sentence to make it absolutely clear, no trucks before 7 a.m.
Fine by me.
Okay. And could I ask one more question, if I could? You've obviously talked to the neighbors, I presume, about all this. One of them is here. I'm kind of under the understanding that things have sort of, at least with a lot of you guys, have kind of been worked out. Would that be fair to say? Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Other council members? Any questions?
So the total number, thank you, Patrick. The total number of parking spaces is 570, do I have the right number? 500 and something?
I don't know the number off the top of my head,
But
but it
it's-
hasn't changed from your approval.
Hasn't changed, is the point. We were talking earlier about, something else, but this basically goes,
No, this is to clean up on these two minor issues, yes.
right. Okay, great, thank you.
Other council members? Vice Mayor Snyder?
Well, just a quick comment. I really appreciate the work that's been done by the developer here. I think you've worked very, very hard to meet the needs of the community, and I look forward to working with you in a great development, and I want to thank the neighborhood as well for their reaching out and trying to reach a legitimate compromise here. So thanks to everybody involved.
And again, I've previously disclosed my property ownership and my involvement with the association. I did have just some brief questions and comments. One, I know the developer has gone to some great lengths in improving and mitigating the noise that's going to be generated. Now I think we're down into the details. One thing I would just point out, and it does get down to the details, is there is, as I understand it, a gate of some sort or
A door.
Or a door. I hope some attention's going to be placed to the decibels that will create.
Honestly, we haven't spent a whole lot of time and energy on it at this stage, but through the site plan process, we know it's a big concern. Not only the acoustic quality of the door, but the noise that the door itself makes going up and down.
Understood. And I'm not asking that there be a response to that, other than it's something that I think everybody needs to be cognizant about. I don't think, if it turns out that the door makes the situation worse or something like that, I think we need to consider that, because I don't think that's the intent at all on anybody's part. But it's the details that I think are really important in this. And then two, I had asked that store hours be looked at in what Harris Teeter is doing in other projects, and I know at least one store has got, as part of their approval plan, had some limitations that are greater than ours. I understand that Harris Teeter is also very receptive to working with the community, and my understanding is that there are various restrictions that they have either self-imposed outside of the planning process, and I understand that they don't want to be necessarily tied down in a planning zoning situation, but to the extent that you're working with Harris Teeter, the council's sort of going to be done with this relatively soon, but we are going to get the calls if things go wrong, and so is the city manager if the noise issues and problems happen. So I would just encourage Harris Teeter on the loading, traffic issues, work with the community on making sure that they're managing that, and they need to self-impose restrictions to be good neighbors, which I'm confident they'll do based on their other projects that are in neighborhoods, so.
My experience is they're willing to do that, and that's more of an operational issue that is hard to get handled on a zoning case, because the operational issues might change 20 years from now, and the zoning would preclude them from doing something. So from a day-to-day operational basis, I don't think that's a problem.
Understood. And I think that makes perfect sense. That's why at the end of the day, I'll support this change to give them the flexibility, because we don't know what's going to happen 20 years down the road, and we don't want them to not be in compliance, and another council has to take that up. But at the same time, my expectation is that they are going to be good neighbors, and that we're not going to get calls that we have to call Harris Teeter about, because I don't think that's in anybody's interest at that point. So anything further on this? We'll have the roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't have, I'm sorry. I'm going to chalk this up to, I'm functioning now on 3.5 hours of sleep, I think.
Mayor, just to clarify, the motion would be to approve TR 13-19 with the amendment at line 88 made by Mr. Tarter to add the word "all" in front of truck deliveries?
That's correct.
Is that correct? Just want to be clear on that.
I can't remember that, it's you.
That's correct. And what I'd propose that we do is actually get public comment before we take a motion.
That's
So
fine.
the first speaker slip that I have is from Mr. Chuck Anderson.
Good evening, Chuck Anderson, 137 West Annandale Road. Speaking on behalf of the immediate adjacent neighbors to the Harris Teeter project, also speaking in my informal role as a reporter on this whole process to email distribution of about 50 Winter Hill homes that have been following closely. What I wanted to say tonight may actually have already been thoroughly addressed by the exchanges between the council and the city attorney. I don't have enough legal training to know for sure, so I'm just going to say my quick piece anyway. A lot of new information about the project came at us last week, information which was on balance very positive. We learned that Harris Teeter was accepting of the drive aisle change that is very important to the neighborhood. We also learned that it was very important to Harris Teeter to have Saturday morning deliveries for the smaller trucks begin starting at 7 a.m. Now that change is something we as a group are happy to endorse the earlier hours as we seem tantalizingly close to achieving something that we view as far more significant on the drive aisle. So all that we would ask, however, is that the drive aisle change be formalized, as it appears the council is tonight possibly going to make formal the changes to the delivery hours. Obviously, it would be an unhappy outcome for us if the drive aisle change were to be rejected by the Planning Commission. Yet, because of what's done here tonight, we would still have the earlier delivery hours. Again, perhaps this is a non-issue by now. I'm not entirely sure. On the handout in the hallway with the city attorney's revisions, I can't quite tell whether that gets us there. We are basically just interested in having those new delivery hours be conditioned on the drive aisle change. That's the gist of what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Members of the public that wish to address council on this issue? And Ms. Bashad, did we receive any written comments on this?
Yes, sir.
And again, as I understand it, to address Mr. Anderson's comments, I believe that the city manager did clarify in his discussions from the dais that essentially they are tied in, and if the Planning Commission does something else, it would actually violate the VCs, and we're going to be back here, which I don't think any of us want. Is that correct, Mr. Foster? And one comment that I'll make at this point is, still have my concerns about the public process issues, but again, I don't want to hold that against the developer in getting this moving, but I do think that there is a process issue that the council needs to take up with the city manager, perhaps offline, because this has been pending for a while, and I think this puts the city council in a very awkward position, trying to get this moving, but yet meeting the public interest that I hope that the council will take up. But as the mayor, I'm not happy with how this process went down, given that there could have been advance warning. Had I known about this Friday, I would have prudentially just put this on the agenda and let council decide, and the public at that point would have known that it's potentially on the calendar. But that did not, unfortunately, happen. I found out about it late this afternoon as I was on my way back home from work, which is very unfortunate, and I don't want to see that happening again on such an important issue. So, but I don't want to belabor that point, but I do think the council needs to take that up at a different time. Mr. Schaaf, you'd call the roll.
Do we have a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Not a motion yet. If I can get a motion, please.
Somebody can,
I move TR 13-19 revised.
And I believe that Mr. Foster had provided some language before we take that motion. Mr. Snyder, I don't know if you want to,
I'll continue. The developer is committed to move the drive aisle interior to the garage and has agreed that his site plan will also contain this feature. This is a significant improvement that addresses a concern raised by neighbors to the project. The developer has also proposed an adjustment to the voluntary concession number 11 to clarify when tractor trailers and trash trucks may make deliveries. Based upon that commitment from the developer, I've made the motion.
thank you. If I can get a motion, or a second to the motion, please. Thank you. And the motion that's on the table is,
And that motion was to approve, Mr. Snyder, is that correct?
That's
TR
right, to approve
13-19?
TR 13-19 is revised.
As revised,
and the revision was toward the word all.
correct? I have that.
The Tartar amendment.
Yes.
Don't bring up Tartar.
If we have that, we may have 5 versions of this again.
I'll call the roll now.
Yeah, Charter amendments lead to 5 versions.
Can I vote now?
Ms. Berry? Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Kalen? Mr. Pepe? Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tartar? Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, council.
All right, we are on to consent items.
I haven't moved the consent agenda.
Well, we need a report. Mr. Shields, do you have a report on the consent item?
There are 2 items on the consent calendar. The first is authorization for the city manager to purchase up to $450,000 in FY13 and up to $300,000 per year for information technology solutions, including hardware, software, maintenance, and support-related accessories from CDW Government. This item is before the council. The prior authorization was for up to $200,000 per year. We're asking for this increased authorization because effectively we're making 2 fiscal years' worth of purchases due to a budget amendment that occurred fairly late in the fiscal year in June. So as it happens in one fiscal year, we're expending above that $200,000 level. But we've also found that CW Government is a lower cost provider because of the way that they are through the Joint Powers Alliance contract, which gives us some economies of scale. And so we were asking for then authorization for up to $300,000 per year, subject to appropriation in the budget process for future purchases. Secondly, the council is asked to authorize the city manager to award a contract for up to $209,000 to the Fort Myer Construction Corporation for an LED signal head conversion and pedestrian improvement project. This is to convert our signals and our pedestrian crossing signals to LED technology. Has the principal benefit of reducing our electricity use, but secondary benefit, which is very important, when we have power outages, which is frequent, and we convert to battery backup, those batteries will last significantly longer with an LED technology than they do with incandescent lights. We've converted a good number of our signals over in the past, but with this procurement and using some of our state money, as well as some leftover CMAQ money, we'll be able to do every signal in the city. That's our goal. So those are the two items on the consent calendar.
General questions for the city manager? Okay, not seeing any. If I can have a motion to adopt the consent, please. It's Mr. Pepe on the motion to adopt. If I can get a second.
That's what I do wrong.
We don't have one yet.
Second.
That's Ms. Berry on the second.
Move to adopt, that's what I say wrong all the time.
Okay, Ms. Berry,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan. Yes. Mr. Kalin. Yes. Mr. Pepe. Yes. Mr. Snyder.
Yes.
Mr. Charter. Mayor Baruch.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Any council member comments? Mr. Campbell?
I'm glad the vote on the Rushmore project is finished, but it's a, you want to raise it at that time. But you talk about process concerns. I'd like to expand those process. This project has had a number of process irregularities that I'd like that we can discuss at the same time we discuss the introduction of this particular revision. Meetings took place. We were also, it raises the bigger issue that we have discussed before with you and Mr. Snyder, actually, and myself in particular. We had a very good group of residents from Winter Hill, fundamentally reasonable, wanting to see how solutions could be reached. And I think that worked out very well. However, there is a tendency, and we're going to have to deal with it, is that all of our projects will be taking place inside of somebody's neighborhood or abutting somebody's neighborhood. And the issue is how much influence, and are we going to give each neighborhood a veto power over every project? Now, this worked out very well because I think of the nature of the individual involved. But if you don't have a reasonable group like that, we will find economic development to be extremely difficult here. And we have not really addressed that issue. How far are we prepared? I mean, obviously we need to address neighborhood concerns to the fullest extent possible. No question about it. But there is a point where it may be okay for the neighborhood, but the city may actually end up being very negatively affected if each neighborhood ends up to be happy with the solution. That we have not addressed that. This particular project did not really help define the parameters of that concern. But there will be virtually no economic development if it's turned over to individual neighborhoods.
And Mr. Kalin, I think your point's well taken. I think one thing that we discussed before was actually the voluntary, or I'm sorry, rather the SE process itself and how that's handled. And I believe that that was something that I had requested, is that the Economic Development Committee of the council, working with the EDC, or I'm sorry, the EDA and EDO's office, tried to address, working with the planning staff, to see if we can streamline it a little bit. I think we tried to do that by having invited members from the Planning Commission and the Economic Development Authority attend the council's EDC meetings as non-voting members as a first step. I think it was a first step, but I don't think it's gotten us there. Certainly Arlington's got a model. I believe it's the Arlington Way. Probably Dave Tarter knows a lot about that, and so does Jim Snyder. They do it sort of upside down. It all goes public, lots of public discussion before the council ever sees it. And it's almost, it's fully baked before the council sees it. And the council, I believe, or the board rather, has a very hands-off approach at that point. It's almost the opposite of how we tend to do things, if I understand what Arlington does. So there's a variety of models out there. I think it's worthwhile to have the Economic Development Committee of the council take that up. But then, again, you're the chair, so you get to set that agenda. Mr. Kalin.
Thank you. And you have raised that before, and we have already agreed that that would be one of the agenda items. Maybe what you said covers the concern that I raised. I'm not 100% sure, but certainly I think it's very important that we do develop ways to streamline the approval process. There's no question about that. the role of the neighborhoods, I still think remains to be defined, but it's going to be a serious one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other council member comments?
I'm,
Mr.
Mr. Mayor, in substantial agreement with Mr. Kalin, and at the same time, I do want to thank the Vice Mayor and the Mayor in the weeest hours of our last meeting 2 weeks ago for finding a way to basically approve the project and yet allow for some more time for the developer and the neighbors to discuss something that was very important to them, which did, it appears, as Mr. Kalin said in this instance, work out very well, saving me from some impetuous act or statement that I might have made to try to get it over with. Finally, 2 weeks ago, I think it's worked out in the end well, and I just wanted to thank you all for enabling the council to move forward in the manner that we have. My other question was, are you going to have a mayor's meeting in the morning, or?
That's the plan.
Okay,
at 8.
thank you.
If I could, maybe I just join in and add my 2 cents that I think we can improve this process. I think we should, and I think we need to improve the process. Given the size of our community, I think we can make this much better for everyone. It was alluded to earlier, some of the issues, and I think getting input earlier is better. I mean, some of the input we got from various boards and commissions, to my recollection, was the week before the vote on this case, and it's too late to really make meaningful changes a week before a project's going to be voted on, and I think it denigrates the work of the folks in the boards and commissions when their input is given so late. It just doesn't have as much meaning as it could be otherwise, and so I look forward to working, in the EDC context, the EDC group, or this group as a whole. But I think we can and need to, given the size of this community, we can be much more nimble than our neighbors. And I think we can gain a competitive advantage while at the same time preserving the rights and the needs of our community, our neighbors in particular. Thank you.
Other council members? Vice Mayor Snyder?
I just wanted to change the topic briefly to express my appreciation to all the city staff and volunteers who made the Civil War Day here a success despite somewhat uncooperative weather. And Congressman Moran, who spent about an hour and a half in the city walking around the farmers market and participating in the dedication ceremony. So thanks to everyone concerned. Also wanted to recognize especially Diane Morse, who I think is retiring. She's done a very, very good job in maintaining and opening and making more accessible our historic resources. And I would ask that we somehow recognize her accomplishments perhaps in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Ms. Berry?
I just wanted to point out one of my responsibilities on council is to represent Falls Church on a number of COG committees having to do with the environment, and there were several meetings in May. Chesapeake Bay, climate and energy policy, and most recently the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Control gathering, which I know Mr. Pepe and Mr. Snyder are familiar with because it certainly impacts transportation. I think one of the interesting things that came out of this last meeting was a report on the transportation shifts and changes in transportation modality over the last 10 years. And regrettably, we still seem to be reliant on the single occupancy vehicle. But an interesting rise in happily enough, in public transportation, specifically buses, and that seems to have something to do with discounts that the federal government gives, stipends for people to take transportation. But it does speak to some of the things that Mr. Snyder's been working on in terms of beefing up integrated large-scale transportation, which I think is probably going to be the answer for the metropolitan Washington area. So I commend that report to your attention if you happen to be interested in this topic.
Thank you. Other council members? And I just wanted to, again, thank city staff, or police department, sheriff's department, and I believe Arlington and Fairfax provided some aid yesterday. Is that right? That those jurisdictions provided mutual aid as well?
They did, so we benefited from some of their services, including some of their canine corps that were visible in the city and helped, I think, keep a safe environment, I think particularly in light of some recent events. And so it was good to have them in the
Yep.
city.
And I think that was great. So, Mr. Shields, if there's a way that, perhaps I can sign something just acknowledging the aid that they provided, I'd be happy to do that if that pleases the council. In the spirit of cooperation, I think it was great cooperation. It is a regional event. And I was actually a little worried, given that Metro was not opened on the East and West Falls Church Metro station, so I thought our attendance was actually going to be poor yesterday, but it turned out to be well attended despite the Metro stations around us being closed. So, Mr. Shields, if I can also request that we get, I know that this is going to come up and we're going to get complaints because I saw the tow trucks out in force. I saw that we had a lot of properties with signs up, but I still saw a lot of tow trucks. If you can just let council know what the towing activity looked like as compared to past years.
Yeah, I will see if we can get some data on that. But I will say that before Memorial Day, our Economic Development Office, Becky Witzman in particular, contacted our merchants, our property managers in particular, and really urged them not to tow. I think many went along with that. And those who did not posted more prominent signs. And Broaddale, as an example, had a very visible temporary sign that said, no event parking, towing strictly enforced, to try to help with communication.
Yeah, let me try this out. Hopefully my car won't magically get towed after I say this, but, Mr. Duncan, I'm gonna drag you into this since you were part of the conversation. While we were in the squad car, Mr. Duncan and I saw some of this going on, and we sort of jokingly said, isn't there anything that the council can do to handle this on special events? So I'd be very interested to find out, and again, not an urgent request, but since 4th of July is coming up, and this is another occasion where predatory towing goes out of control, is to see if there's anything affirmatively that the city council can do under state code, whether it's to, have some kind of hiatus on towing for certain days, or anything that we can do to further that. I know that we've made some strides dealing with our towing ordinance that may or may not have helped, but if there's anything that we can do on certain days when we know that there's a huge uptick on towing, and I think Memorial Day and the 4th of July are the two big days, and there may be others as well. Because I can almost guess that next week's newspaper is going to have something about predatory tow. Which is, yeah, understand. So. Vice Mayor Snyder? You're good. You're not going to weigh in? All right. Anything else, Council? Okay. So we are not going to be conducting anything on the calendar because we're going to be going into closed session. Okay. And we don't have any minutes to approve. So when we come back out, are we going to be taking up a motion publicly?
We may have a motion publicly, yes.
So we may take on one other public business matter coming out of the meeting. So we'll adjourn in open session then. So, and this is, I apologize to the council, this is going to be a long closed session. Thanks to Mr. Kalin for adding one. Upon a motion made by council member.
Barry.
And seconded by council member. And passed by a voice vote of city council. Council went into closed session pursuant to 2.2-3711A7, consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual probable litigation, where such consultation or briefing in an open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body, in consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body relating to specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel related to City of Falls Church v. Atlantic Companies, and pursuant to 2.2-3711A3 of the Code of Virginia for discussion or consideration of acquisition of real property for a public purpose or of the disposition of real held property, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, and to 2.2-3711A7, consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual or probable litigation, where such consultation or briefing in an open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body, and consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, to which the water transaction. And again, I previously disclosed regarding the Atlantic, and stand by the prudential disclosure I previously made and filed with the city clerk. If I can have the roll call vote, please.
Ms. Berry?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan? Yes. Mr. Kalen? Mr. Pepe? Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Tarter? Mayor Baruch?
Yes.
Thank you, council.
And we are going out at 10:05. John, where would you like us to go?